Unfortunately, there were some other things that came up that I do not want to talk about, which made it challenging for them to be able to continue as candidates under the Conservative Party.
This decision did not come lightly for John Rustad, leader of the party. I spoke to him many times before they actually decided that I was not the candidate to have out there for this particular riding.
My tweet did not meet the party's views, I suppose you want to call it, and so I would no longer be a Conservative candidate.
The Conservative Party of British Columbia has been making headlines after dropping 2 candidates that were supposed to be running for them in this year's election. The decision to drop them isn't sitting well with all of their supporters. Let's talk about it. The Conservative Party of BC has been making quite a political splash in recent years. After not having a single MLA for over 12 years, to rebranding themselves in 2022, to earning official party status in 2023, the party now finds itself dominating over the current opposition party, BC United, in the polls, and even more recently nipping at the heels of BC's governing NDP party. And they've all done this while giving voice to constituents who have been previously ignored on issues like parental rights, with education concerns with so-called sexually inclusive learning resources and lessons, and the right to bodily autonomy over measures like vaccine mandates, which for some reason this province is still holding on to when it comes to our healthcare professionals.
I have very little patience for people who aren't immunized in healthcare.
So perhaps that's why many of you reached out to me, scratching your heads, wondering why not 1 but 2 healthcare workers who the party had decided to run as candidates were suddenly dropped by the party. That being seasoned family doctors Dr. Stephen Malthouse and retired registered nurse Jan Webb, both of whom have spoken out in their own ways against the ever-decaying politically correct narrative of all things COVID-19. According to Aisha Etzi, the party's president, the disposal of Malthouse and Webb is a product of the party growing at a rapid pace, making them bound to make some mistakes, which apparently includes nominating candidates like Malthouse and Webb who were not the right fit for the team. But is that answer really good enough? And how are Malthouse and Webb feeling about being given the boot from the party that purports to value freedom of speech? I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News, and in this report, you'll hear from Malthouse, Webb, and even the Conservative Party of BC leader John Rustad. Take a look.
I think it was probably about 6 hours after the announcement of my candidacy, and you know, it really was the shortest candidacy in the Guinness Book of Political Records. Certainly for British Columbia, it was a very short stint. But there are various reasons behind the party, the Conservatives of British Columbia, letting me go, or thinking perhaps I would be too hot a potato, and obscure some of the issues that were really important for British Columbians.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that a little bit more, and I also have a statement from Mr. Rustad, the leader of the party. But what happened in those 6 hours? Well, we saw the media certainly got their fangs out really quick, like they were waiting for the moment with headlines like we're showing on the screen right now. But that's really no surprise. You are a doctor who spoke out about medical tyranny. You attended freedom protests. We covered many times. To many people, you are a hero, still speaking to this issue that is still relevant considering we haven't dropped our vaccine mandates for healthcare workers here in British Columbia. But I guess the confusion is, what do you think is the surprising moment for the Conservative Party of British Columbia? They chose you as a candidate. They had to have known something. Did they just not properly vet the situation, or is something else going on?
Well, the party is growing very fast, and by that I mean I think they're even themselves a bit surprised about the popularity. And so in they have to get enough people behind the scenes to be working for vetting people properly and looking through the material. Now, in the last 4 years, I have a lot of material. I've been out speaking on tour with other doctors. I've done lots of interviews, and there's some details that I don't think they were able to cover. And I doubt that even a well-oiled machine, and I call it a machine because it seems to lack human qualities, like the NDP, even they would have missed. And I think when those were brought up by the media in such a, what seems to be a coordinated and certainly a very vicious attack on the party and on myself, that they were surprised and sort of caught on the wrong foot. And I think they decided they had to make a decision quickly, and that's why I had such a short candidacy. But nevertheless, I think they did it for the best for British Columbia, because our current government is really terrible and needs to be replaced. There's no doubt about that. The bills they put out, Bill 31, the New Emergency Act, which means they can take your house and your property practically at the whim of the minister who declares an emergency. And that emergency could be, that you have a heat dome or something like that. Climate change and contagion, all those things are now being brought into the Emergencies Act, which puts people in this province in jeopardy. And that's not even talking about health care, because there's more than 1 million people in British Columbia who do not have a family doctor. The emergency rooms are closing, and wards as well. And people try to get an ambulance, and they're coming late because they don't have personnel to man them. And there's so many different things that this government has done that they just need to be removed. And if we could remove them tomorrow, it would be good for the province.
So I hear you saying loud and clear, there needs to be a change for British Columbians. So does that mean you're still supportive of the Conservative Party of British Columbia, or now after you were dropped, have your opinions changed on who's the better alternative?
Good question. I wouldn't have been applied to be a candidate if I didn't have confidence in the party and the platforms and the policies that they're putting forward. We need to give so many things back to the people here in British Columbia. We need to give them good health care. Let's start with that. But we also need to get rid of SOGI. We need to get the pornography out of schools. We need to give parental authority back. We need to get safer drug supply, which is policy NDP. We need to get that supply off the streets and off the internet, and certainly out of the grade school, the schoolyards. So my feeling is that I stood behind them because they are actually telling the truth of what's happened. But there are some issues which many of the voters have not really woken up to. They haven't connected the dots, and that's the COVID shot issue and all the public health things that were done in the last 4 years, which have really, everybody knows someone who's been injured by this shot, and yet ours is the only province in the nation that is still promoting it and boosters. And that's not based on science. And if people just have to look around their neighborhood. But I think that the party, John Rustad and the party, decided that if we went into that issue and all the minutiae of it with a general voter populace that haven't really figured it out yet, and it would be too controversial. And perhaps that was something better left on the shelf. And where we have these other issues which are so obvious that the current government, the NDP with the Liberals, whatever they call themselves these days, and the Greens, have not done anything to stop. So I believe that's their stance. And I feel that although there was some sort of, I would say, evidence what we call cancel culture, which is the idea that someone speaks and it's not what you consider to be in the better good, I think that's in here as well. And that is perhaps something which needs to be changed through some introspection in the party itself.
Well, cancel culture is certainly a sore subject with the millions of Canadians that do come to Rebel News for their news source. That's why I wanted to catch up with the leader of the Conservative Party, British Columbia himself, John Rustad. I was able to catch up with him at an event. I wanted to ask him a question I'm getting from people. Does this mean that the party no longer represents free speech? Here's what he had to say.
I've had many reach out to me. They're concerned that perhaps your party doesn't stand for freedom of speech because of candidates being dropped like Dr. Stephen Malthouse and Nurse Jan Webb. What is your response to those concerns?
We're very committed to the reforms in healthcare that we need to do, especially things like getting rid of the mandates, hiring back our health workers. We need to be looking at actually compensation for our healthcare workers that were fired and fired unjustly. There's many things that I share with Dr. Malthouse and with Jan Webb, many things in the healthcare system that need change that we've had lots of talks about. Unfortunately, there were some other things that came up that I do not want to talk about, which made it challenging for them to be able to continue as candidates under the Conservative Party. We're building a very strong team around this province. I need to be able to make sure that I protect all of our candidates around the province and that we can take on and defeat the NDP come this October.
Now, I think it's only fair for you to be able to speak to some of what was written about you in the quick hours after your candidacy was announced. So if you look on the site here of the College of BC Physicians and Surgeons, it says that your license was suspended. They have written here as some of the rationale that you wrote vaccine exemptions, which included false statements, stated medical conclusions absent of any objective medical evidence, and provided diagnosis and courses of action potentially harmful to patients. Again, this is all available for the Conservative Party of BC to see. But anyways, moving on, what do you make of that? And I should point out, your license is suspended. You haven't had a hearing, innocent until proven guilty. But what's your thoughts on that?
Well, my license was suspended, and it has been for the last 2 years, because I was writing medical exemptions for many people across the country, in fact. And I thought that particularly children, teenagers, and young children should have an exemption because if they ask for one, or if their parents ask for one, because we're talking about an experimental, which we don't know the full extent of the adverse effects that could come from it, but we're seeing that there are quite a few. And the evidence is that this shot did not stop transmission. So there's no reason to give it to people to stop them from going to their workplace or to go to the university or to play sports or anything like that. So my feeling is if people wanted they had informed choice, and if they chose not to take this COVID shot, then we should respect that, and in fact we should protect that as physicians. So I did this despite it seems to the college that it was going around public health policies, but in fact if those public health policies are harmful to people and to my patients, then it's my obligation as a physician to do everything I can to go around them. In fact, even say that they're wrong. And you may know that I have a bit of a history with speaking out from the very beginning about Bonnie Henry and lockdowns, masking, distancing, and eventually the COVID shots, which I felt that none of those have been good for people. Our Bonnie Henry and Adrian Dix and David Eby, the NDP party and their appointees, are pushing pregnant women, children, and elderly to keep taking these shots when there's no evidence that it's beneficial to them.
Now, you are not the only medical professional to be dropped from the CPBC party. Jan Webb, a BC nurse who's forbidden from working under the current regime, also was dropped as well. Here's some of what she had to say. All right, Jan Webb, now you were a candidate for a couple of months for Esquimalt Colwood's riding, and then boom, you put up a tweet in response where you gave opinion. I would say an educated opinion. You were a nurse for many years. You're a retired nurse. Tell us what happened to you after that.
Well, it was a very short, lasting tweet. I put it up around midnight and then found out about 8:45 the next morning that my tweet did not meet the party's views, I suppose you want to call it. And so I would no longer be a Conservative candidate.
Now, I do want to read a comment, though. This comment is from the president of the Conservative Party of British Columbia. Her name is Aisha Esty. And she responds to your tweet, and she says, Jan Webb is a trained nurse, and frankly, she should know better than this. She has been removed as the Conservative Party of British Columbia's candidate for that riding. How did that statement make you feel?
Well, I didn't actually find out about that statement till about 4:00 that day. And then I figured out, I get what all the firestorm is about. I didn't have a chance to speak with Aisha. And again, this seemed to be kind of spiraling down a misinformation situation. And not from my viewpoint necessarily, but just simply the way things were communicated within the party. I have great respect for John Rustad. Again, launching this and bringing it together, we have come such a long way. And I both Stephen and I consider John a friend. We really do. And we just want to help these awesome candidates get into government.
This decision did not come lightly for John Rustad, leader of the party. I spoke to him many times before they actually decided that I was not the candidate to have out there for this particular riding. And we have to understand that the party is not, these leaders and some of their advisors are not scientists or doctors. And when they start to get into what they see as quicksand, which is a topic that they don't know about, they feel that they may have difficulty defending it in front of the press or, in debate period, and that it may take up a lot of time and eclipse the more important issues, of which we have so many in this province. So I think that personally, I still stand behind John Rustad and the party. I do think some internal changes in the party need to be made, but that's pretty typical of a party that's growing so fast. And the issue of freedom of speech, which I know John is on the right side of personally, but I think they made a decision which is kind of a little bit like politics as usual in some ways, and that has put many people off. But we need to be smarter now. We haven't got the luxury to wait a couple more generations or a couple more cycles of government to save this province. And I'm not talking about the province as a piece of land. I'm talking about the people in this province. People who have mothers and fathers and children and go to work every day and try to put food on the table. We've got taxes which are killing us and so on, and we need to focus a lot on those issues. But freedom of speech is very important, and we cannot ignore what happened with the COVID issue, and that our government, the current government, destroyed a lot of lives by their policy, and they knew better. I think we would be very generous to call them just stupid. They're not. They should be able to read the science just like doctors can, and just like the lay people are doing right now. So I think that we should have a little bit of take a deep breath here, and see that we cannot have politics as usual, and we also have to address some issues such as freedom of speech. And I still think that this party is the people that I would vote for and will vote for, but they do need to maybe address these issues of freedom of speech and cancel culture, and I think they will understand what the best way forward is going to be.
Well, you heard it from Malthouse and Webb. When it comes to voting time for British Columbians this year, they believe there's still only one choice. Let us know in the comments if you agree. And if you want me to have my boots on the ground bringing you reports you can trust about this upcoming general election, which I'm committed to do anyways, consider helping making those reports possible. Go to our special website called bcdecides.com to donate what you can to keep the upcoming election reports going strong. Again, that's bcdecides.com. We appreciate your support.